Okay, my goal for this presentation is simply to make sure that we understand these structures and just give a brief little vignette, sentence, maybe half a sentence for what we can associate these structures with so that going forward we'll be able to use this as a reference and a guide for understanding some of the brain functions that we'll talk about. Let's go ahead and do it in order, starting with number one. This is going to be the cingulate gyrus. The cingulate gyrus is part of the limbic system and is involved in conflict resolution. Specifically, it is all about cost-benefit and pain avoidance. All right, structure number two. This is the corpus callosum. This is the primary center, the primary area where the left and right hemispheres communicate with each other. And from our studies, we know that neurons travel in tracks. The tracks that cross from left to right or right to left are called commissural tracks. So we'll just add that. All right, these next structures, 3, 4, and 5, are part of the diencephalon. We have over here on number 3 the hypothalamus. Number 4 would be the thalamus. And number 5, the epithalamus. Going back to the hypothalamus, let's put down visceral control center. This is regulating the autonomic system, and it's also regulating homeostasis. This would include things like body temperature, satiety when it comes to food, eating patterns. We also need to put down, importantly, endocrine regulation, and that is due primarily to its regulation of this gland right here, number 6, which is the pituitary gland, the key master gland in the body for endocrine hormone signaling. Going back to the thalamus, there's a couple of things that we can add here. We can call the thalamus the gatekeeper and also the sensory sorter. All senses come through the thalamus except, and we'll draw a little nose here, except for smell. Smell is not hardwired into the system, but all other senses come through the thalamus. Sight, sound, even touch, taste, all of these senses come into the thalamus. The thalamus sorts them out and parses them out to the different locations of the brain where those sensory inputs, the afferents, will be interpreted. Moving on to the epithalamus, there's really only one thing that we want to mention here, and that's on the back side, the more dorsal portion of the epithalamus, we find the pineal gland. This gland is involved in sleep-wake cycles. It's sensitive to light, so let's draw a little sunshine there. Help us remember that this is involved in sleep-wake patterns, and it does this primarily through the creation and release of melatonin. Okay, continuing our journey, let's come back over here to number 7. This structure here is called the amygdala. The amygdala is primarily classified as a key player in the limbic system, but also plays a very important role in reward circuitry. If we think about functions for the amygdala, I want you to associate the amygdala with emotional memory. This is going to be episodic memory, also can be biographical. And we'll add social processing, including facial recognition as we identify those areas around us. And the primary response that we're going to get from all of this is fear. This is the fear response. Individuals who lose function of the amygdala are reported to not be able to have fear. They're not afraid of anything. Another key component of the limbic system is going to be structure number 8. This is the hippocampus. It's also involved in memory, a slightly different form of memory. This is about learning has everything to do with cognition, which is learning through thought, experience, sense, spatial learning, and memory. This is the what and the when and the where of memory. And a key component of this is short-term memory. We began to fully appreciate that several decades ago when an individual named Henry Molaison, who was suffering from seizures, underwent some pioneering and perhaps cavalier surgery to have his hippocampus bilaterally, both hippocampi on the left and on the right, removed. This cured him of his seizures, but it also left him with the inability to form new memories. So every 15 minutes or so, he would not remember anything that he had learned up to that point through the day. Of course, procedural memory, which is primarily from the basal ganglia and the cerebellum, were not affected. He could learn a new task, and he could repeat that task and become better and better at that over the days, but he couldn't remember that he learned the task. Okay, the next structures, 9 and 10, these are part of the brainstem, and the first lobe on the brainstem, 9, this is going to be the pons. Number 10 is going to be the medulla. We'll talk about some of the specific areas in here, but medulla, this is going to be the control center for vital functions. Think heart rate, also assistance in regulating breathing. The pons is also associated with a lot of this stuff. Let's go and look at some of the specific areas and see if we can label these. As we zoom in, we can see 11 and 12 pointing to these little nodes on the dorsal portion of the midbrain. These are going to be collectively called the corpora quadrigemina. So 11, we have the superior colliculi, and 12, we have the inferior colliculi. Paired nodules, 4 in total, so together they're called the corpora, Latin for bodies. Quadrigemina, the 4 twins. Moving down 13 points to the red structure in the midbrain, this is the red nucleus, thought to be involved in gait, in other words, how people walk, but more today that is taken over by the cerebellum. So many scientists consider this area in the brain, the red nucleus, to be vestigial, which essentially means that evolutionarily we've grown out of it. It doesn't serve a significant purpose in our bodies anymore. 14 and 15 also work together. 14 is pointing to the VTA, which stands for ventral tegmental area. And 15, it's hard to see because it's black and it's on a black screen. This is the substantia nigra, which literally means black stuff. These two are both important because these are the primary centers where we see dopamine production. Dopamine is a key neurotransmitter involved not only in the reward system and addictive behaviors, but also in body movement from the basal nuclei, the execution of a motor function, which is why damage to this area or death associated with specifically the substantia nigra can lead to the shakes and tremors that we commonly observe in Parkinson's disease. These next three structures, 16, 17, and 18, are probably not super important, but I do want to highlight them as key areas in the brainstem where specific neurotransmitters are produced. So if we look at 16, this is called the pedunculopontine nucleus. This is a key source of acetylcholine, the most common neurotransmitter in the body. We've talked a little bit about that already in its role in the peripheral nervous system. 17 is the locus ceruleus, and this is the source, a key source of norepinephrine, another key neurotransmitter in the brain. And lastly, 18, cluster that we call the Raphe nuclei, a key source of serotonin.